In this video, we're going to look at what happens at the different plate boundaries. We're going to look at a divergent boundary, the three different types of convergent boundary, as well as a transform boundary. The first one we're going to look at is a divergent boundary. These boundaries occur when two plates move away from each other, and this is most of what we've looked at so far, talking about mid-ocean ridges and things like that. The mid-ocean ridge has a crack down the center of it that I've talked about before, and this is referred to as a rift valley. As these two plates move away from each other, magma flows up from the asthenosphere and cools to form brand new rock in that rift valley. And because new rock is being formed, or new crust is being formed, these divergent boundaries are also referred to as constructive boundaries. Convergent boundaries occur when two plates crash into each other, so moving towards each other and crash into each other. But what actually happens at these boundaries depends on what the plates are, and mainly whether they're oceanic or continental plates. And because these are crashing into each other and destroying land, so that because there's less crust, these are referred to as destructive boundaries. So the first one we'll look at is when an oceanic plate and a continental plate crash into each other. And when that happens, a process called subduction occurs. And subduction is when one plate goes underneath another plate. So here we have the oceanic plate going underneath the continental plate, because as we know, the oceanic plate is denser, so it goes to the bottom. As that oceanic plate dives down into the asthenosphere, it gets melted, so it turns from solid rock into magma, liquid rock, and causes a pressure buildup where that extra magma is high up in the mantle. This pressure builds up, and eventually the magma spurts out of the land through the continental plate. So it goes all the way up through the continental plate and bursts out in the form of a volcano. Now on the other side, on the oceanic plate, where it dives down under the continental plate, it forms a trench, and the trench is as the crust bends to fit underneath the continental crust. And this whole process, we're having big rocks crashing into each other. The pressure build-up and release produces earthquakes. So we get earthquakes all the way along this boundary. We get a trench on the oceanic side and volcanoes on the continental side. The next one is if two oceanic plates can collide with each other. And now here subduction occurs as well, but this time the faster moving plate is going to slip underneath the other plate. And again, that pressure buildup of the new magma that's formed from the crust melting is going to come up through the other plate in the form of a volcano. Now eventually, as this happens, the volcanoes are going to get higher and higher and eventually get up above sea level. When they get above sea level, they form islands, and we refer to these as a volcanic arc or a volcanic island arc. Again, earthquakes are going to happen and a trench is formed, so similar to when an oceanic plate and a continental plate crash into each other. If two continental plates crash into each other, the forces push both the plates upwards, so neither is more dense than the other, and they're both very big, so they just sort of push up into the air where there's space. They also push down into the asthenosphere in the mantle a little bit, but pushing into rock is harder than pushing into air, so most of it goes up into the air and forms very high altitude mountain ranges, but that are very narrow. So an example of this would be the Himalayas between the Indian subcontinent and Asia. The last type of boundary we're going to look at are transform boundaries. The transform boundaries occur when two plates are neither moving away or towards each other, but scraping past each other. So this again causes earthquakes because it's two big lots of rocks scraping each other, so the pressure build up and release will cause earthquakes. However, it won't destroy or create any new crust. And for this reason, these types of boundaries are also referred to as conservative boundaries. In this lesson, we've looked at the different things that occur at plate boundaries. We've looked at divergent boundaries, plates moving away and new rock being formed, for example, the mid-ocean ridge. We've looked at convergent boundaries and subduction occurring, for example, when an oceanic plate crashes into a continental plate, the oceanic plate subducts under the continental plate. This creates volcanoes, earthquakes, and a trench. We've looked at when two oceanic plates crash into each other, the faster moving plate subducts, causing a trench as well as island chains. And when two continental plates crash into each other, forming mountain ranges. And finally, we looked at transform boundaries, where the plates are moving side by side to each other and scraping, and this creates earthquakes.